Hey guys, All in Crypto here, and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another video. Today, we have a really exciting interview lined up for you with Sebastien Guillemot, the co-founder of DcSpark, here today to talk to us about a variety of things, the layer 2 space, Algorand, Cardano, and everything in between. So welcome on board, Sebastien.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure. As somebody who, and I think I'm very late to this trend. I think in some cases it's always been the goal. Where I'm kind of at right now is I'm really seeing an excel in the kind of layer 2 space. And actually the vision that I have for certainly these kind of layer 1 blockchains like Cardano, like Ethereum, like Algorand is that you're likely going to end up with more traffic on the layer 2s than you are the underlying layer 1. So that makes, I believe, layer 2's a massive deal. How do you find that statement?
Yeah, I think we're already very close to that being the case. Layer 2s on Ethereum already are larger than basically every other layer 1 out there. And it's only a matter of time until they flip layer 1 Ethereum on almost all metrics. They've already done it on some metrics. Obviously, layer 2s won't just be popular on Ethereum. Ethereum's kind of like been a semi-pioneer on this, along with a few other layer 1s that have been early on this idea, but it's definitely an idea that's been spreading to every other chain as well.
Yeah, do you see that kind of a vision for Cardano, Algorand? Do you think, and you are, I guess, a key part in this in Cardano and Algorand, do you see a real push towards this in other ecosystems?
Yeah, I think whenever a new idea comes out in blockchain, it takes a while for it to propagate across ecosystems. So I think definitely there's a lot of people looking at these ideas now. I mean, for Cardano, the announcement of Paima coming to the Cardano ecosystem, which is a layer 2 for gaming, for example, got I think almost 2,000 likes on the announcement of that. So it shows that, people even in the Cardano ecosystem that doesn't have, quite a layer 2 natively to the Cardano ecosystem yet, they've heard of this idea, they're familiar with it, and they're really excited to see it come over. So I think it shows that how much broad appeal this concept has had, and how it's kind of spread through crypto. And I'm sure we'll see a lot of people, innovate on it, because obviously Ethereum has been kind of a pioneer on this, but the model they've come up with is never perfect, right? And so I'm really excited to see all these other blockchains, come up with their new variations on these different ideas and see what comes out of it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I just had to ask you that question before we dived into it all, Sebastien, because I think with these layer 1s, the layer 2s are going to fix the problems that the layer 1s have. That's the kind of it, and we're seeing that, I think in Cardano's case, they're the answer for development. They're the answer for, in terms of people coming on and building that might be EVM friendly, like what Milkomeda are doing, interoperability, scalability. You can do so much with these layer 2s and really sort of supercharge the layer 1s. But Sebastien, could we start off with a bit of an introduction to yourself? Who are you, and how did you sort of get involved in the crypto space?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Sebastien. I've been part of the crypto space for about 5 years professionally. So I originally joined the Cardano ecosystem, where I was working at one of the founding entities, and eventually ended up leading the kind of Cardano R&D part of that company. I then left to start my own company called DcSpark, which I like to think as an ecosystem builder company. So we wanted to not just focus on like user-facing products. Like we didn't want to be a DEX company. We didn't want to be an NFT marketplace company. We wanted to be like a crypto ecosystem builder company. And so we tried to cut for the entire end-to-end of what it means to be building in the blockchain space. And out of that, one of the ideas we had was to get into layer 2s. And so we started on a project called Milkomeda, which was a layer 2 to add EVM support to non-EVM blockchains. That has since then split off into its own project. DcSpark is still a core contributor to that project, but it's definitely grown since then. And I'm also the co-founder of Paima Studios, which is a separate company from DcSpark that's also working in the layer 2 space, notably focusing on gaming and Web3 use cases as opposed to DeFi.
Yeah, which is a massive use case. I think we're still yet to see this sort of wave of GameFi really kick in. You know, blockchain is innovating so many industries. Finance is, of course, the main one at the moment, but we're seeing it in terms of identity. It's having a big impact in terms of across the board. Gaming is a massive use case that I think we've still got to explore. And what would you say the difference? You mentioned DcSpark. What would you say the difference between DcSpark and Milkomeda are? Because I often see people get these two confused. DcSpark is the company tasked with building out Milkomeda. Is that a correct statement?
So we are the ones that started originally, and now we're a core contributor, but we're not the only contributor to that project. So that's the relation. So basically, it's incubated at DcSpark and then split off into its own thing. So as I mentioned, DcSpark is like broader in scope. So obviously, as a contributor to Milkomeda, we're involved in layer 2 development, but we also do work on blockchains themselves. We do work on developer tooling. We do work on user-facing products. So it really kind of the whole end-to-end.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, I'm personally a fan of what you guys are doing. I think we need people like you in this space to propel it. And really, you're at the forefront, in my opinion, of where I think this space is going with Milkomeda and a lot of the other things that you're doing, which is certainly interesting. It's why I was so excited to get you on. Can you explain what Milkomeda is and what they're trying to do?
Yeah, for sure. So we were inspired by the growth of layer 2s when we saw that, you know, people started working on this and we're working towards getting these in production at the time. Notably, we were interested in the concept of rollups. So if you don't know what a layer 2 is, it's a way to basically extend an existing blockchain while trying to inherit security from the underlying chain. So there's a lot of blockchains that want to increase scalability through some new network, for example, Lightning, right? There's a lot of blockchains that want to increase interoperability by trying to, you know, add EVM support to their blockchain, for example. So there's all these desires to add new functionality to existing chains without having to bloat the main layer 1. Like you can't have a layer 1 that has every single feature possible. It's just not possible engineering wise. So you want to add these new functionality, these new layers without having to make huge changes to the underlying code. And so layer 2s in the sense of like Lightning for Bitcoin are not necessarily a new idea. What was new about 2 or 3 years ago was this concept of rollups, which is a different kind of layer 2 that works better for global data access. So if you ever use Lightning on Bitcoin, you might know that the way it works is kind of like it's like pairwise, like you send invoices to people, you transact to people. Whereas rollups really allow for like global layer 2s, which is really what was needed for DeFi. So, we had layer 2s before through Lightning and these state channel solutions, and Cardano had its own work in Hydra. But rollups really allowed this idea to, spread further, especially in the DeFi space. And so really interested in this, notably because projects like Cardano, for example, wanted to add EVM support to their blockchain, right? So Cardano does not have native EVM support, but if we want to get projects to come over from other ecosystems, it's nice to have EVM support. And also, Cardano uses something called the UTXO model. You don't have to know what that is. It's technical details, but just know that the way the Cardano blockchain works is very different than the way the Ethereum blockchain works, and they have different trade-offs. Some things it's good at, some things it's bad at. And so, it's always interesting when you have trade-offs if you can just support both options, because then developers can pick, what model works best for their use case. And so we're interested in this. And so we decided to start working on Milkomeda, which is a project to add EVM support to non-EVM blockchains. So we started working on this project for the Cardano ecosystem. Now, Cardano does not support rollups in the best way possible at the moment. And so for Cardano, we started as a sidechain for Cardano. So it's not a layer 2, it's a sidechain. If you don't know the difference, the layer 2, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to try and inherit the security of the underlying chain. And for sidechain, this is not really the goal. The goal of sidechain is just to have like a separate network, and they're philosophically aligned. Like you'd have a separate network, it has its own blockchain, it has its own validators, it has its own everything, but philosophically somehow it's aligned with another chain. So it's trying to add functionality to this new chain instead of trying to become its own independent ecosystem. And so we started the sidechain for Cardano, and then we also started working on a layer 2 roll-up for Algorand, which is another blockchain. And we launched both those solutions. So I think the Cardano solution launched about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I think, and the Algorand one launched about 4 months ago.
Wow, you sort of gave us so much information there, and I'd actually asked you off camera. It would be great for us to get an explanation between layer twos and side chains. And I think that was I didn't really know the difference myself, if I'm being totally honest. And I thought that was a great explanation. So Milkomeda on Cardano is a side chain, not a layer two.
Yeah, so because we weren't able to get rollups with the existing technology that's in the Cardano ecosystem, what we decided to do is it's better not to wait, right? You could say, okay, let's make all the changes to Cardano to get it to where it needs to be. But of course, this always takes time. And so we decided it's best to just start off as a side chain. And then once we get, the right technology in place, then we can upgrade this in the future. There's a lot of work that can be reused. And so we started working on the side chain, and we've been building a lot of tools for the Cardano ecosystem to make building these side chains and these layer twos better for the Cardano ecosystem, from multiple Cardano improvement proposals to multiple open source tools and so on, to get us closer to that goal. And so that's also why you might have noticed that Milkomeda for Cardano uses ADA as its base asset. There's no new token, because the goal is that we want these to feel as one ecosystem. And not only did we make that Milkomeda uses the same assets Cardano, so you don't have to go buy a new token. You might have also seen a recent announcement where we'll support using Milkomeda from any Cardano wallet. So Flant, Nami, Eternal, you don't have to go download like MetaMask. You can just use Milkomeda directly from there, interact with EVM contracts directly from your Cardano wallet. And then also later this year, hopefully relatively soon, we'll also be announcing liquid staking going live. And so you'll basically be able to use EVM smart contracts, but still earn your Cardano staking rewards. So that's how, how despite the fact that we're a sidechain, we're still trying to make it feel like a cohesive, a single unified platform. Of course, there's some stuff we aren't able to do because it's a sidechain. Some features we just can't implement. But hopefully in the future, once Cardano has the right technology in place, and with all the work that we're doing and other companies as well, we'll be able to do an upgrade and make that even more of a seamless experience.
Yeah, the sort of side chain, layer two, we now know the difference. Ecosystem that we're seeing evolving, I think is nothing short of magical, because you guys have brought EVM to Cardano essentially. You mentioned Hydra, which is, everyone knows about this 1 million transaction per second. Not that we're ever at or anywhere near a stage of needing 1 million transactions per second. However, in the future, 20, whatever, 10, 5 years down the line, that might be the case. So you've got an EVM answer on Cardano. You've got scaling through Hydra. You've got things like Marlowe, Mithril. You've got all these really exciting things coming. And this is why I think that what you're doing is such an important part in evolving the space forward, certainly for these layer ones, because layer twos and side chains, I think, solve a lot of the issues or maybe designs that the layer ones couldn't quite get over. And it is certainly interesting. So
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's two things, right? So there's adding new capabilities to blockchain. So I think it's super important, because if you look at an ecosystem like Cardano, trying to get any new feature added to Cardano, it's a lengthy process, because there's no one company in charge of what gets included anymore. You need to get general support from the community for this idea, create a Cardano improvement proposal, get that approved, and for some large features, this might take a while to get everybody on in agreement on the best way to implement this. And one thing that layer 2 allows is kind of permissionless innovation. If you want to try out a new idea, you're not sure if it's a good idea, but you want to try it out and see if it gets traction, you no longer need to first go through this whole process to get it directly added to layer 1. You can just spin up a new layer 2 for the ecosystem and implement your idea there, and get people to try it out, use it, see if it takes off. And then if people really like the idea, you could eventually use this as motivation to bring it to layer 1. So, I think one of the great things about layer 2 is that it's been able to just enable so many companies to just try out new ideas and bring a whole new wave of innovation that we haven't had in crypto for a long time.
Yeah, and you can do that in a safe way that doesn't affect the layer one, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the important things to understand, is that the layer two doesn't affect the layer one. So if there's some sort of an issue with the layer two, the layer one's fine. It's like the plugins that we're now seeing for Cardano, with people trying to experiment with different kind of languages. And I've just got this sort of side question that I'd love to ask. I've got so much to ask you, because I think what you're doing is fantastic. What do you think about Cardano's decision? And I do have a question where I'd like to know why you were attracted to Cardano. What do you think about Cardano's decision to go with Haskell? Pro or con?
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah. So
it's a complicated question, because there's pros and cons, right?
yeah, so keep in mind, Cardano started around 2015, so quite a long time ago. At the time, most blockchain software was written in C++. And if you're not a programmer, just keep in mind that C++ is like not an easy language to get right. It's a language that's well known for being really easy to make mistakes in. And this is kind of problematic, because although the reason people use it is because it's a very efficient language, and so it's easy to get, the high, I mean, it's better if you want to get like the high TPS numbers. It is, really easy to make a mistake, and that's not what you want from a, decentralized project that's handling a lot of money, because a single mistake could be very costly to the ecosystem. And so, people were using C++ despite the risks, because just the performance was really necessary. And so at the time, there's other programming languages that could offer perhaps slower performance, but much higher safety, one of which was Haskell. And so because of that reason, that's why Haskell was adopted. Now, the problem with Haskell is that although there's a lot of stuff to make it safer, it's also much harder to write, and there's fewer developers that know it. But that was decided to be a good trade-off at the time. Now, since then, there's another language that has grown a lot in popularity. It was around at the time, but not nearly as popular. It's called Rust. And if you know many blockchains nowadays, you might realize that the majority of them are written in Rust. And there's another programming language called Go that's also used by quite a few blockchains these days. So had Cardano started today, probably it would have been written in Rust. And in fact, if you Google information about Cardano and Rust, you'll notice that there's quite a few SDKs for Cardano in Rust, some of which are written by DcSpark, some written by other companies. And in fact, this Rust ecosystem powers almost all wallets in Cardano. It powers huge components of many dApps in Cardano, and just a lot of the ecosystem in general is powered by this Rust tooling. So it shows that, although Cardano is written in Haskell originally, nowadays you can write the serialization logic in Rust, the wallet in Rust, the backend indexers in Rust, and with the latest announcements, you can also run smart contracts in Rust as well. So I wouldn't say Cardano is just a Haskell blockchain anymore. It's kind of, Haskell and Rust are the two big ones. We don't have a Rust full node yet, but at this point, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't help but ask you that question, because I always have this, and I often think to myself, was Haskell the right decision? Because you really limit the amount. One thing that I've found concurrent with people looking to build in Cardano is it's kind of a nightmare to find someone to do it, right? However, this is kind of almost a non-problem, I think, as we move in the direction which you've just mentioned. And also now with the likes of Milkomeda, which means that you can build an EVM, right? So you've kind of, the fact that Cardano is on Haskell, I think it's of course relevant, but the cons that come with it being on Haskell are becoming problems that are now being solved, which I think is very, very interesting. What initially attracted you to Cardano, by the way?
Yeah, so at the time Cardano launched, keep in mind that blockchain was not quite where it was today. Now, if you look at a lot of the new blockchains being put out, unless they're meme coins, they usually have large, very serious engineering teams behind it, often with a research arm that has, very novel research papers accepted at world-renowned conferences. And so that's kind of the norm nowadays. But at the time when Cardano started, this wasn't. Cardano was very much one of the pioneers in this, kind of way of tackling blockchains. Instead of considering it just purely an engineering challenge, also considering it an academic challenge as well. And if you're around at the time, you might remember that Cardano got a lot of flack for this approach, but it turned out that a lot of the blockchain ecosystem has kind of come to accept this way of development. And so I was kind of interested in blockchain at the time, but most blockchains, because they were not focusing on kind of the research aspect of it, they tended to come in with just some vague idea for an improvement. They'd be like, oh, like I want to create a new blockchain, and I think this idea is good. I have no like hard mathematical reason to think this is good, but this is my intuition. I think this will work better. And usually this project came and then quickly died right afterwards. And so it didn't feel like something I'd want to put my career on, because I don't want to, quit my job, put my entire career on the line for a project that might just disappear in a few months. And so the interesting thing about Cardano was that they took a very different approach, which is, kind of doing fundamental research first to validate the approach before taking it. And so this is appealing because it means that, although blockchain at the time was still a risky industry, not many people were working on it professionally, it still meant that, if it didn't work out, the, research work that Cardano did would live on, regardless. Now, fortunately, it all worked out. And as you know, Cardano not only is still around, but very much, one of the top blockchains out there. But, that's kind of the reason I got involved originally.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I'm not, my background's in dentistry, believe it or not. And I've been living off the markets now for 5 years. So I don't have a technical background at all. So the papers, believe me, I've tried to read them, but they are, I think if you're not that way programmed, can be quite hard to get your head around. But this kind of peer review approach that I think Cardano has taken, which initially attracted you, I think we've actually seen that be kind of a winning formula with all the hacks and outages and stuff like this, which really excites me, and I think even in regards to a layer 2 sidechain ecosystem that we're moving towards, if you look at Ouroboros and the kind of staking mechanism for Cardano, do you think there's any advantages to that in the layer 2 sidechain space? You mentioned liquid staking, for example. Do you think there's any advantages to how Cardano is put together that make it better at layer 2 and sidechains than like Ethereum, for example?
Yeah, so although Cardano's incentive system is well designed from a user experience perspective, the fact that you can stake whenever you want, the fact that you can stake while using smart contracts, the fact that you can withdraw your stake whenever you want, this is all great stuff. This is slightly independent from layer 2 considerations. Now, there's some stuff that kind of is neatly designed. For example, you can have staking rewards earned by layer 2s by smart contracts in Cardano. So a smart contract can earn the staking rewards and distribute those staking rewards on layer 2. And that's what basically that's the same system we're leveraging for Milkomeda that we wrote. But where Cardano really shines from a layer 2 perspective, if and when all the features come in place, is that Cardano state is not a global state. And what do I mean by that exactly? If you look at the Ethereum blockchain, it uses something called the accounting system, which is like every time a new transaction comes in, it comes in a definite order, and every transaction might access any part of the Ethereum ecosystem. You don't know ahead of time what transaction is going to modify what part of the application of what part of the Ethereum blockchain. And so you have no choice but to run transactions one at a time. So you go one transaction, next transaction. And every time you run a transaction, you can't know ahead of time what this is going to do. And so you have no choice but to run them sequentially. Now, this is not the case for Cardano. For Cardano, every transaction has to be deterministic. It has to basically define what it's going to do ahead of time and do exactly that. And so it's much easier to eventually, if we get there in the roadmap, have some kind of parallel processing of transactions. It also makes that you don't have to reference the entire, you don't have to keep the entire blockchain state in memory for every transaction you process. You just have to know the local information that you're going to modify in your transaction. So although this is very technical, and I'm sure a lot of people, maybe did not get to I understand the difference between these two systems. The key point I want to emphasize is that in Ethereum, when you have a layer 2, it's very hard to parallelize these layer 2s, to have two different layer 2s like run in parallel, because at the end of the day, the Ethereum blockchain cannot differentiate between these. They're just transactions, so it has to run them in parallel. Now, fortunately, this is efficient anyways, thanks to the way that other 2s work, which I won't get too much into. So it's good enough for them. But Cardano has, thanks to its architecture, the opportunity to make these layer 2s run in parallel more efficiently. Now, obviously, getting to that point will be a lot of work. And this is not something we have today, but I'd say it's something that our architecture enables, that the Ethereum ecosystem doesn't quite have access to. You might have heard of a few other blockchains talking about like parallel transaction processing.
Yep.
And you might have heard of other blockchains actually referencing models similar to Cardano. For example, if you ever heard people talk about like Sui and the way they work, you'll notice this similar to the way Cardano has some stuff set up. So it's you've seen a lot of the industry kind of move away from the Ethereum model and move closer to something called the UTXO, which is the same model that Cardano has. And a lot of this is thanks to the fact that it, if done right, can enable much faster transactions by parallelizing execution, which is just not something you can do in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Yeah, fascinating. I often look at things like state proofs on Algorand and Mithril. Do you think they're going to play a role in the sort of layer 2 space? Because they're essentially going to allow you, I believe, to have a trustable source of where the blockchain's at in a kind of compact manner. Have I got that correct, or am I just rambling on?
Yeah. So this is useful to a certain extent. It's more useful for bridging than it is for layer 2s, in the sense that if you want to go, for example, from Algorand to Ethereum, the Ethereum side doesn't know about the existence of the Algorand blockchain. Like from the Solidity perspective, the Ethereum blockchain itself, not the user base, but the blockchain itself does not know about Algorand, and the Algorand blockchain itself does not know about the existence of Ethereum. These are just two computer programs, running separately. Now, state proofs are, one way to basically take a compressed version of the Algorand state and submit it to the Ethereum ecosystem, so you can have kind of like this bridging mechanism. And this is useful for this kind of bridging. And similarly, Mithril can partially enable some similar mechanisms, as well as Mithril is also focusing a lot on trying to have faster and safer initial synchronization of the blockchain state for similar reasons. Now, the reason this is not quite as useful for layer 2s is because in layer 2s, because you're adding a new layer on top of layer 1s, like imagine you have like Algorand here, and you have a layer 2 on top of Algorand. So layer 2 can see everything that happens in the Algorand blockchain state because it's sitting on top of it. So it means that you don't necessarily need like a state proof or some compact representation of the blockchain to access the data, because you can already access.
You're already using the layer 1.
Yeah. So there are still some cases where it might be convenient. And I can talk about that more if you're interested. But just like the general concept is like there's cases where it's useful, but more broadly, it's useful for bridging more than it's for layer 2s.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, I have a technical background, so I've got a basic kind of overview of all this, which is, why it's so great to have somebody like yourself on who can sort of break it down. It is actually, I'm sure, considered at one point all this technology and looked at the trade-offs for using it and not using it, and kind of how you're building your models moving forwards. I've asked you about why you were interested in Cardano. Why has Milkomeda also decided to deploy as a layer 2 on the Algorand side of things? What about Algorand appealed to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different things. One of them is that obviously Algorand itself is very much a chain that has done great academic research, and some of the work that they've done has moved forward the space of cryptography in general, as well as blockchains. And so that part obviously appealed to me for the same reason. Another point is that they're friendly with Cardano. So Charles talked positively about them multiple times. They've talked positively about Cardano multiple times. And so, it's two ecosystems where we felt like people get along well. And the third one is that, as I mentioned, for Cardano, we're working on a lot of changes to make, the sidechain feel as close to the as the being part of Cardano itself as we can. But we don't want to wait for all those features to get implemented to really kind of dive deep on the layer 2 technology itself, how to build a rollup, actually building that to production, because this knowledge can be usable for every other product. And so we decided it's best to, work on like the sidechain and all that Cardano kind of roadmap, and in parallel also work on like a proper rollup for Algorand, which actually has extremely good support for rollups, kind of one of the better ones out of most cryptocurrencies. And so it had the right tech for building what we had in mind as well. And so we've built that for the Algorand ecosystem, and it's been great to work with them, very supportive ecosystem, and we've made a lot of good friends over there. And so that's hopefully answers like from both a technical perspective, philosophical perspective, and business perspective, why this made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I really like the guys over at Algorand. We've had John Wood on a couple of times. Of course, he went from Cardano over to Algorand, and I think Algorand's a very impressive blockchain, and they've, Silvio is kind of like a pioneer in the cryptographic space, right? I think ZKs came out of, was that a Silvio invention?
I think. Yeah, quite a long time ago. Yes.
Yeah. So the very, very impressive guy when it comes to crypto. I think he won the Turing Award, which will be familiar with you, but to me, not that familiar. But I know it's a big deal. But yeah, Algorand's a super cool blockchain. One question I've got for you is, with Milkomeda A1 on Algorand and with Milkomeda C1 on Cardano, can these two interoperate? And is there a vision for that in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're both based off EVM. And so what it means is that although we could try and manually connect these two, it's better to kind of leave that to the open market, in the sense that there's many companies out there that work on EVM bridging. And so instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, which is very hard to get right, we'd rather just have these companies come in and bring these kinds of solutions. People have already started doing this. There's multiple bridges, and there's even some cross-chain dApps. So for example, Blueshift is a DEX that runs both on Milkomeda A1 on Algorand and Milkomeda C1 on Cardano. So it's great to see that people have, kind of stepped in to help bridge these communities. Yeah,
I feel like quite often people try and reinvent the wheel with crypto, right? It's like, I don't know about you, but my kind of vision for interoperability is messaging. I don't think it's actually physically taking the token from, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but this is just how I see it, from Ethereum to Solana. I don't think that physical transaction needs to take place, more just a messaging service, which we kind of already have in the traditional banking world, which we're trying to kind of put to rights. So I do feel like people often try and reinvent the wheel. With Milkomeda on Cardano, what are some of the interesting things? You mentioned the gaming side of things. What is the interesting, or what right now is Milkomeda doing on Cardano that you find interesting and that you think is a big deal?
Yeah, so a separate company that I started, I'm one of the co-founders of that, along with Nicholas and Robert, two of my co-founders. We are focusing on layer 2s for gaming. It's called Paima Studios. And that's deployed to Milkomeda C1 as well as some other ecosystems too. And part of the reason we thought this was going to be a really good fit is because, like, if you look at blockchain into segments, there's some segments that require kind of like a lot of either VCs or whales, you might call it. And notably, DeFi is like the biggest one. And the reason why is because if you have like a DEX protocol, you really need liquidity to make the DEX attractive. If there's no liquidity, nobody's going to be able to use the DEX. And where does this liquidity come from? It comes from people who can afford to just keep money sitting on an exchange, which is usually not the average person, which oftentimes lives paycheck to paycheck, right? So the survival of a lot of DeFi protocols and how competitive they are often depends on their ability to attract the fairly larger investors. And so, it's fine for Cardano to compete on those fronts, and it definitely has done a good job at that. But we also noticed that the use case that was really taking off on Cardano was not so much DeFi, but NFTs. And the reason why is because NFTs don't require, large institutional players to come in to succeed. What it really requires is a broad, passionate set of individuals. And so that's why Cardano has become one of the top NFT chains. And I think gaming also falls in that bucket. It's, to have a successful game, you don't need, some rich few players to play the game. What you need is a broad, engaged set of active users. And so we thought, because of this, it makes sense as a kind of killer app for the Cardano ecosystem as well, because if Cardano has anything, it's a large, passionate set of users. And so we thought that this was going to be kind of the natural next step for the Cardano ecosystem. And so when we started Paima a little over a year ago at this point, we thought that, probably gaming would be big on Cardano, and turns out we were right. As you might know, there's quite a lot of gaming projects in the ecosystem at this point. And we're hoping that now, since we have Paima that's released the developer preview last week, this is going to be a great way to get more companies involved. In fact, we've already had over 20 companies apply for a developer preview.
Wow, it's certainly interesting, Paima. I am an ex-gamer. I had to put that to one side and kind of get my life back on track. I really did enjoy gaming that much. I partook in all of the, World of Warcrafts, RuneScapes, all of this kind of stuff. And I think actually that there is going to become this sort of meeting of blockchain and gaming. And I think simply for most layer ones, you couldn't facilitate the kind of transactions needed for some of these games, which is why I actually think, and it kind of ties in with where we started this interview off, that there's going to be a lot more traffic on the layer twos, like Milkomeda and others out there. Is that the kind of way you think things are going? Do you think these kind of gaming applications and Cardano has one place it's really strived is definitely the NFT space. I mean, I've been following it since Spacebuds, which is totally different to how we do things now. But do you see that kind of progression for gaming, that it evolves and goes on to the layer twos?
Yeah, I think so, especially because the way to write a game, for example, in Solidity or in Plutus, is just too hard for a lot of applications. These platforms like Ethereum and Cardano, they're not meant to run huge applications. Like most smart contracts are fairly small logic. It's like, if I receive this token, swap it for this token. Like it's usually not that complex, and that can run on a decentralized computer. Running an entire game on a decentralized ecosystem, not so easy to do. Not so easy to program it, not so easy to make it efficient, not so easy to make sure it runs right and does not have any critical bugs in it. And so, despite the complexity of it, because people are so excited by the idea of gaming, people have spent, quite a lot of time to get the experiences that exist so far. But if you look at a lot of the kind of blockchain games out there, most of them are either not so complicated. They weren't able to get kind of like the full experience they want to build. But I think it's even like more unfortunate is a lot of them didn't end up running as a blockchain game. Instead of like building the game on chain like they really intended to do, they ended up building a Web2 centralized server somewhere that runs the game. And then they just have a trusted bridge between their centralized server and the blockchain. And so, if we really want to get to the point where we can have, decentralized games, that hook into identity systems like NFTs, we're getting something better than what's out there. And I think layer twos are really, the key technology that will enable this. And so that's kind of like the thesis behind Paima, and that's why we started. Notably, we noticed like some key points with NFTs that want to get into gaming. If you think about it, like a lot of NFTs have already built their brand, and they think that the next step for their brand is, okay, well, let's get into gaming. It's the next logical step to expand their brand and get their users more engaged. But it's usually two key problems they have. The first one is that these NFT creators are usually not programmers. A lot of these are artists or hobbyists. And so asking them to go write something in Solidity or write something in Plutus It's not something that they can easily do themselves. And outsourcing this is also really hard because you don't know the people you're outsourcing to. There's no guarantee they do a good job, and they're also very expensive, right? And then even if you do manage to somehow get this working, it's a huge brand risk as well. Like imagine if Spacebuds released the game, and then the first day after they release, the game gets hacked and everybody loses all their money. Like this could kill a project that's been years in the making. And so a lot of brands are hesitant to get into gaming even if they want to because of the potential brand risk. So the way we wrote Paima, because it's a layer 2, thanks to the fact that it's layer 2 and we get all this extra flexibility, we allow writing games with Web 2 skills. So you can write your game in JavaScript, GameMaker, Unity, Godot, these kinds of applications. And through Paima, we turn that into an on-chain Web 3 application. So you don't need to run a centralized server for the application to run. And they get created as a non-custodial application. So to play the game, you don't need to give custody of your funds to the game. So even if the game gets hacked, user funds are not at risk. And so it really enables these NFT brands to get into gaming without having to spend a ridiculous amount of money on developers. In fact, for a lot of these things that these days you can just use ChatGPT to get a lot of the code out there. And then not only they now build this game much easier, they can also do it without having to risk their brands, and they can easily put out a few different games, make like 4 or 5 of them for their community, see which ones take off, and iterate on that quickly and safely.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, if we see an uptick in people building games, like we've seen an uptick in people releasing NFT projects on Cardano, it's likely to do and attract a lot of people. I'm certainly excited to watch and see what kind of an uptick it has and what sort of development comes out of it. Just so I can get this 100% clear, Paima is separate from Milkomeda, or does Paima use Milkomeda's underlying tech? Can you just explain that?
Yeah. So Paima is a SDK for creating layer 2s. Now, the games we have currently run on Milkomeda C1 on the Cardano side does not have to run there. And so I'm sure in the future, people will use Paima for different EVM chains or different blockchains entirely. So this is where the project started. But I think Milkomeda C1 is a blockchain that's well suited for games, not because it's connected to the Cardano ecosystem, which, as I mentioned, has the right audience to be a successful gaming ecosystem, as well as Milkomeda C1 has a 4-second block time, which is actually going down to 2 seconds. Probably in about a month or 2 from now. And then it also has instant finality. So there's no rollbacks on there either. So it also has, and also low transaction fees. So that's kind of like all the key properties you want for a game. And so, for a lot of people, the people in the Cardano ecosystem, they're going to say, okay, well, I want to create a game because we have the right ecosystem and our fans want it. And Milkomeda C1 provides like the fast block times, instant finality, and the low fees, and Paima engine, which is all like I really want for my great gaming experience. From that side, Milkomeda C1 is like a natural partner for the Paima project, but there's no like stock overlap between these two companies. They're two separate entities, 2 separate projects that just happen to be well aligned with each other.
Yeah, perfect. And is this all has a link to Cardano with it being a Cardano sidechain? Is that correct? It still utilizes the underlying.
Layer 1. And so for every game deployed to Paima for the Cardano ecosystem, you can play them directly from any Cardano wallet, Nami, Flint, Eternal. So you don't have to go download MetaMask or anything. And you can, as a game developer, deploy your game, write your game in Unity, for example, deploy it directly to the Cardano ecosystem, and then people can just start playing with any wallet they have.
Big deal. I think everything that you're doing is a big deal. I'm a personal fan, as I said to you off camera. We spoke about the Cardano C1 side of things. Could you maybe give us a little bit of an update or an overview on what's taking place on the A1 Algorand side of things for Milkomeda?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of the roadmap is actually shared between the 2 projects. So for example, when I talked about the announcements where you'll be able to call EVM dApps directly from Cardano wallets, the same functionality is coming to Algorand. So you'll be able to call EVM dApps directly from an Algorand wallet, like Para Wallet. And so the good thing about having multiple ecosystems is that we can build one feature and ship it to two different ecosystems for, I wouldn't say the same cost, but like, there's some shared cost between the two. So it allows us to be more efficient. So that's, one good thing that's coming out for A1. We also recently released a draft paper for how we're going to decentralize the Milkomeda A1 layer 2. And so we are in talks with the Algorand Inc. for how we can get all of that implemented to get the layer 2 project, fully decentralized in the hands of the community as well.
Yeah, really cool. I'm certainly going to be watching development on both C1 and A1, and really just generally, I'm very excited for this sort of side chain layer 2, and I think that may have always been the vision for Cardano. You mentioned in their early papers they had a vision for side chains before side chains were even a thing, right? And layer 2s, and I do honestly believe that layer 2 side chains solve the issues that the underlying layer 1 potentially can't, whether that be developability, whether that be scalability, interoperability. It's super exciting. And just finally, I've got one more question for you. Does your view align with that? Do you see layer 2s? What's the layer 2 vision for you?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to see growth in layer 2s in every ecosystem. I think almost every blockchain at this point has a strategy for layer 2s, be it stuff like Paima and Hydra for Cardano, be it all these different rollups for the Ethereum ecosystem, be it parachains and Polkadot. Everybody's coming up with their kind of take on this idea, and so they're definitely going to take off. And I think especially for projects like Paima that bring this huge interoperability gain to the ecosystem. The Paima team has been working on this for just over a year, and we're a fairly small team working on that project. And I feel like even with that, we've achieved a huge amount of stuff that nobody else has really worked on so far. But the cat's out of the bag. We've already deployed to mainnet, so I'm really excited to see how far our team can get, because this is just 1 year. So imagine 2, 3, 4 years. And I'm sure people will look at these concepts and iterate on them and bring new functionalities. And so I think we're really at the beginning of what layer 2s will bring to the ecosystem.
Very, very exciting. Sebastien, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm going to leave a link to your socials in the description, DcSpark, Milkomeda, and of course, Paima, and where you can find out more about these really exciting things going on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And the final thing for me to say is thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.